You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 1.
A podcast about love, color, and identity, and where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Vias.
Welcome to the podcast. So for the first episode, I decided I wanted to talk about the first question that you're often asked when you meet somebody new. Well, actually, I would say it's probably within the top 5 questions you're asked when you meet somebody new. And that is, where are you from? And in my case, being a person of color, it's usually followed by, where are you really from? And I would say over the last decade, it has gotten a lot of attention, somewhat considered taboo to ask a person of color, where are you really from? And it's gotten attention in more of a comedic way. In particular, 2 videos, one from the USA called What Kind of Asian Are You by Help Me Find Parents, and a UK version by BBC3, and that's called the Where Are You From game. And I have links to that in the show notes. And in both videos, they talk about the different ways that question is asked of people of color. They're both hilarious videos, so I highly recommend you check them out. And in both videos, they talk about the various types of questions, and I've noticed that over time, the question has also evolved into what is your ethnicity or what's your ethnic background. I'll talk about that actually in the next episode. And so for this, I'm going to talk about the question that seems that it's a bit taboo to ask a person of color because it's gotten a lot of attention. And I actually don't think it's taboo that somebody who doesn't look or sound like me, they ask me this question and they ask me the derivative of the question. And I'm going to share with you why that is. And I actually love answering this question today. But a while ago, that wasn't always the case, that I loved answering this question. In fact, whenever I was asked, where are you really from, I would feel mildly irritated. And if I was at a work event or workshop where I was constantly meeting new people, and every 10, 15 minutes I was asked over and over again, where are you really from? It would turn into anger. However, today I love answering that question no matter which form or which derivative it comes at me. What I realized a while ago is that it's kind of hard to see what's happening when in the middle of it, when you're in the conversation with somebody and they're asking these questions, it's kind of hard to see what's really happening. And for a while, I was driving myself crazy. And here's why. I'm going to name the person that doesn't look or sound like me. I'm going to name her lovingly Nina. I love that name. When Nina asked me that question, if I were to ask Nina, why are you asking me, where am I really from? Her answer is out of curiosity. And I've actually been told this by Nina. Oh, where are you really from? I'm just so curious about other people in different cultures. So Nina has the intention of asking because she's curious about me. And my thought and viewpoint is, you're asking me because you want an explanation of why I'm here. I'm in this spot with you, sharing this space. They're both extremes. I mean, one sounds lovely and the other one is quite defensive. And what I realized is that Nina isn't right. I'm not wrong. Nina isn't wrong, nor am I right. It's kind of hard to know an intention of another person, even if they share with you that intention, because a lot of times we don't even know what our true intentions are without having complete conscious awareness of what intention led to a particular action. The whole point is that you can spend a lot of time here, and I did, and I drove myself crazy, and it was not effective. And so what I'm going to do is break down what is kind of happening, because it kind of doesn't matter which intention is technically the right intention. So as I was quietly driving myself crazy, I did a lot of reading about conversations and in particular also about journalism. And I found out that everyday conversations like the one you're having when you meet a new person is actually a lot like an interview that a journalist does. I won't go into all the details about conversations and the dynamics and journalistic techniques, but the basic premise is there is a certain amount of power that the person asking the question has in that conversation. And you can widely see this in any interview. A journalist will ask a question. Basically, when they launch a question, they're choosing the topic in which to discuss with that person. They're wording it, phrasing it in a way that can elicit a certain type of answer. So to a certain extent, the journalist has a certain amount of power in the conversation. And our everyday conversations, our social interactions are actually quite similar to interviews that we see on television. When I started watching interviews, knowing some of the background in conversations and journalistic techniques, I could see that the person being asked the question often didn't answer the question. So sometimes you can see this when a politician is interviewed, they often don't answer the question and they go off maybe sometimes on a tangent. And I would watch interviews with celebrities. Some of the most engaging interviews and discussions that I found is when the person being interviewed does answer the question, but adds something more, adds more information, or tells a story. And from that, I started to realize that it wasn't necessarily the journalist that had the power. It was actually both parts. And these are from stellar interviews where, you're watching and you're engaged and you don't realize that the interview is an hour because they're asking also interesting questions and then the person is answering it in an interesting way. And then I started to realize that there was an immense amount of power in me, how I answered that question. And so when Nina would ask me, where are you from? And I would say, I'm from Chicago. And then she would say, but where are you really from? And then my standard answer used to be, I was born in Chicago. And what I realized is that I wasn't using the full extent of my power in that conversation to answer that question. Looking at that, I could see that my answer to that question is a very institutional, governmental way of answering a question. It's kind of like you're filling out one of those forms, your nationality, fill in the box, choose from the fill out list, and realize, well, I can answer this question any way I want, no matter how the question is worded, no matter how many times it's asked of me in different ways. I started to answer this question, and today I answer the question as, I'm from Chicago, the city where The Fugitive took place, and I was born in Cook County Hospital, where ER, the long-running television program, was based on that very hospital. Now, of course, in conversation it varies, and I add tidbits of The Fugitive and Harrison Ford, or I might say something like, I'm from Chicago, it's not really the Windy City, and we don't have a lot of wind, actually. And it was something a journalist wrote. And I started to add what I would call what I loved about my story, what I love about my story today into the conversation. When I really look at being from this city, what are the things that I love? What are some of the elements I love? And genuinely answering from that place, I found that I exercised my power in how I answered that question. And I'd have to say, when I first realized this and I first said, well, okay, I'm going to answer this question differently, it was difficult because I still felt angry, and I told myself that it's okay to be angry. I've been asked this question for a good majority of my life, and I'm going to choose to answer from love about my story, even though I was still feeling irritated from this question and how it was asked of me. And so I started doing it. I didn't sound eloquent when I first started doing it because I had become so used to answering that question in a very institutional way and a very defensive way that it took some time. I mean, I would fumble over the name of the movie or the show and things like that. And I started to practice, and the more and more I showed up with love, it got a little bit easier and easier and easier. And then the anger slowly went away. And then it became from, well, this is a chance to tell my story. It's a great chance. It's a great opportunity. And I felt that I had power in this kind of conversation. And I don't mean power over somebody else. I mean equal power in an everyday social interaction that was so common to me and still happens today. So if you find yourself frustrated from getting asked this question over and over again, maybe consider how you could answer that question in a non-governmental institutional way and genuinely answer it in a way where you love a part of your story. Because although the power might start, just like the journalist might start with the person that asked the question, there is an immense amount of power in how you answer that question. And once you do it, it's not going to be easy the first time, the second time, or maybe even the 26th time. But eventually, what I think you'll find is that the love of your story will intensify and grow, and slowly by slowly, the irritation and the frustration from getting asked in whatever derivative it's getting asked will slowly diminish. So I'm going to wrap up here, and I'm going to end with a quote from a book I am currently reading, and it's by Julia Goldberg from her book Inside Story, and she's a journalist. And she says, "I believe in the power of interviewing as not just a mode of obtaining information, but also as a form of conversation, of dialogue." I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.